point is to have access to the capacity to be those things. Not that you want to go through the world being ruthless, but to be able to find that in yourself for the moment that it is required. Same with Trickster or any one of these.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I am Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Nice to be here.
Before we begin our interview with Lisa Marchiano, we do want to request that you click the link here if you're watching us on YouTube to subscribe to our channel. And if you're listening to us on one of the podcast services, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We are continuing our series on leadership, and we have a special guest today that we're about to introduce, and we're talking about empowerment, right?
Yeah, and it's an incredible interview talking about empowerment, individuation, and of course her work as a therapist, psychotherapist, Jungian analyst.
And this is the book, and it's Lisa Marchiano, The Vital Spark, Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. And just a little bit about Lisa. She is LCSW, is a Jungian analyst, author, and podcaster. Her writings have appeared in many publications. She's the co-host and creator of the popular Depth Psychology podcast, This Jungian Life, and she's the author of Motherhood. Lisa's on the faculty of the C.G. Jung Institute of Philadelphia, and she lectures and teaches widely. She lives and practices in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So without further ado, we are going to segue into our interview with Lisa Marchiano. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Hello, welcome to Soul Sessions. We have a wonderful guest here, Lisa Marchiano here, one of the hosts of This Jungian Life and the author of her new book, The Vital Spark, Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. Welcome, Lisa.
Welcome, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, and thank you for making the time. So I'll let you start.
Well, I love this concept that you talk about. There's so many things I pulled out of your book, which is so amazing, especially since I'm a woman and can relate to a lot of the topics. This idea that I never heard before is that women are guardians of the feeling values in the environment. And I just thought that was really interesting. I'd love to talk about that. Just start off with, the what women's roles are and that kind of feeling values that they have to hold. And would love to hear a little elaboration on that idea.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think first of all, let's just sort of name the difficult territory that we're in, that when we talk about women's roles, whether in positive sense or in a negative sense, we're in that very slippery territory of, are we referring to sex role stereotypes? Are we being prescriptive and saying this is the way that women should be? Are we referencing a kind of classical Jungian psychological principle in which the feminine is, sort of a psychological concept? It's messy, I think, and I think it's difficult to talk about. And in some sense, I just kind of claimed that in the book, that it's messy and difficult to disentangle. I think when we talk about the feminine, we kind of all know what that means. And of course, Jung says that we all have the feminine available to us, even men. Just like women also have the masculine, but I do think we want to stay away from being prescriptive. However, I will say that in terms of the quote that you just pulled out, I mean, it is my experience, it is the experience of many of the women I've worked with and many of my friends, that we often feel like, especially in intimate relationships with male partners, for example, that we are the ones that track the feelings. It often is the mom who kind of tracks how the kids are doing and who's upset. It's sometimes referred to as emotional labor. I mean, not across the board. Some women aren't so good at that, and some men are very good at that. But in general, we are the ones who tend to the feelings of other people with whom we're in relationship. And there's some kind of evidence about this, or at least certainly other people have noticed it. I mean, if now the work of Carol Gilligan and the Stone Center kind of feels like ancient history, but her book In a Different Voice talked about this, that women tend to see themselves in an interrelated web of other people and are very aware of, the emotional connections. And I do think that we maybe just, either by dint of culture or nature or nurture, or perhaps both, that is how we kind of move about our environment.
Yeah, definitely. When I was younger and more immature, more immature than I am now. Uh, yeah, my approach in relationship was, you're the woman, you bring the emotion, right?
Hmm.
I'm here to bring the action, and you
Yeah.
bring the emotion. And I think that's kind of where we go wrong, right? Because it's putting too much responsibility on the woman to carry that weight of emotion.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. But I love the distinction too, that men can be that. And it is, I think, more of a social construction than, yeah, and maybe there's some biological reasons for it, but it just, I think, and again, not pathologizing it at all. It's like a beautiful thing to be able to be in a
Yes.
room and be intuitive and just sense how everyone's feeling. I think
Hmm.
it's a good thing. So,
Yes.
yeah, I love that idea. Did you have a question about individuation?
Yeah, because we wanted to focus the conversation on empowerment,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and uh, from my perspective, empowerment in the Jungian model comes through individuation,
Hmm.
that process of really finding yourself. Um, how do you see the challenges for modern women, given kind of the state of society where we're at now, and moving into this new era of artificial intelligence and technology, and
Hmm.
there seems to be a lot of shifting and questioning about gender roles and these kind of questions.
Hmm.
What are some of the challenges that you've seen regarding the individuation process for women?
Hmm. Yeah, well, gosh, I mean, there's a couple different ways I suppose I could take that. I mean, one of the things that maybe I want to lift up is, one of the things that Jung was really strong on was this notion, there's almost kind of Stoic notion that we have to take responsibility for ourselves.
Mhm.
And he has that great quote about that the wise man will, no matter how he's been wronged by his parents and grandparents, the wise among us will look and say, who am I such that this should happen to me? Because only a fool would concern himself with things that he can't control, right?
Mhm.
So I'm paraphrasing that, and I probably totally butchered it, but it's this wonderful quote. And to me, that quote is kind of the essence of empowerment, because it encourages us to take responsibility for that for which we can be responsible.
Mm.
Right.
And I think that I go back all the time to this incredible little piece of wisdom that they call the Serenity Prayer in AA. Which is, grant me the courage to change the things that I can change, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the kicker, the wisdom to know the difference.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I think that in a way that there's so much wisdom that flows from that has to do with empowerment, right? Because the empowerment part is, let me change what I can change. Let me not, bang my head against a wall trying to change things I can't change. But also, if I just sink into a helpless stance and I talk about how victimized I am or how oppressed I am and assume that I can't change anything, well, that's definitely not empowered.
Mm.
And I feel like there's a certain amount of kind of cultural discourse now that focuses so much on how we've all been wronged in one way or another.
Mhm.
I mean, when women talk about how things are difficult in their lives because of the patriarchy, well, yes, that's true. And where are the things that you can change?
Mm. I
Um, you
love
know,
that because I see there's so many, the patriarchy, they're so evil and bad, but that's
mhm,
not empowering. It's like, well, what can I do to
mhm,
shift that? And how am I allowing that to stop me? Just letting this narrative that's been going on in our culture for many years to
right.
how do we shift that? And I
Yeah.
totally so on board with that because it really is that empowerment is knowing that they're, like you said, the things that you can change
Yeah.
and that's why I think it's beautiful of Jung's work. It kind of makes you look inward, and instead of looking at the conflict out there. And that's a
Hmm.
beautiful process. And do you find that when people first enter the work of individuation, that they resist that in a way? They resist that. No, no, you don't understand. Everyone at the company doesn't like this one person, or these type of people are bad,
Hmm.
or this is the way the corporate world is, and it's just the
Absolutely.
way it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and of course, that is related to what we do, right? Which is we project our shadow on other people, and we see it as kind of a problem out there. when the call is just to look and say, well, okay, where's that in me?
Mm,
And what could I do about that? And certainly there's plenty of things, there are plenty of times when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances that are not of our making, that we actually can't control. But then the question is, okay, well, what are the little things maybe even we can shift around that?
mm.
Yeah, interesting. That prayer, I imagine, was influenced by Jung's work, was it?
It's actually really, that same sentiment is very ancient. I once did some research to try to figure it out. So, I mean, of course, it's used in AA now, which and AA was influenced by Jung, but it goes back even to ancient times, very similar concepts. So, a lot of wisdom traditions have generated something along the same lines. So,
Mm,
I think it's a very ancient piece of wisdom.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So the in individuation, we usually begin with the shadow work, right? Because if a person is not willing to accept responsibility for their own kind of what they see wrong in the
Mhm.
world, and not so much to blame themselves, but to understand that, well, if you're perceiving this, that means it's something about your work, or it's pointing to what you need to work with, and
Mhm.
accepting that as your part of your process of
Mhm.
becoming. Um, as long as they don't do that, then there's no way to really move forward. But once they do that, then they can work with their that projection in essence, because it gives us, or gives everyone, a clear picture of what the nature of their internal work is about
Mhm.
in the 3D world in essence.
Mhm.
And so as somebody takes responsibility and moves forward, how do you help them come to terms with that balance of accepting responsibility for their part, but also taking action and
Mhm.
doing the things
Mhm.
they need to do to
Mhm.
make those social changes, for example?
Mhm. Yeah, well, in some sense, I think that's kind of what the whole book is about. Because, and I guess the big answer is, I think it requires cultivating qualities in us that we usually don't have permission to cultivate.
mhm,
Because some of that sense of, okay, well, I'm going to, accept myself here. Maybe my part in it is, for example, getting out of our innocence complex and knowing the truth about ourselves. And if we can be very clear-eyed about that, that helps us know, all right, this part is not, maybe is mine, but that part is really not.
mhm,
And that makes us feel that kind of strengthens us to withstand it in some way. And one of the things that I talk about in the book that I think is an important part of this is this idea of the worthy opponent. And that was not a an original concept. A friend of mine used it, and I said, "Oh my God, I love that idea." She said, "Well, my therapist said it to me."
mm.
I said, "Well, I need you to ask your therapist, where did she hear that? And then can I use it?" And the therapist said, "I don't know. I don't know where I heard it, and please go ahead and use it." So I just want to hat tip to nameless therapist of my friend. But it's a great concept, and I find it useful in therapy too, because again, when we're in a situation where maybe we didn't make it, maybe it's one of those things that's truly not our fault, or not even fault, but we have to say, nope, that's not mine. That's not
Mhm,
mine. But do we just crumble and fold, or can we figure out how to be a worthy opponent? And I find that that's really hard for a lot of women in my practice. Let's say that they're in a kind of high conflict marriage, and that's a really tough situation to be in. And sometimes you do everything you can, and it doesn't work. But I do see some women who find it so hard just to stand toe to toe
mhm,
with their partner and really claim their own ground. And maybe some of those women would do that with their partner, whether the partner is male or female, by the way, and nothing would change anyway, you know?
mhm,
But sometimes I think that, no, you don't know what would happen if you really stood your ground. What would have
mhm,
happened if you really stood your ground? What would have happened in the relationship? But also, what would have happened for you to know
mhm,
that you could do that? I'll tell you a personal story. Uh, my husband, when I was in training, so I was in training, we had little kids. There was money going out the door, for training, and I wasn't bringing a ton of money in because I was, pretty much a full-time mom. And, we had our sort of normal financial stresses. And then it came time in the training process for me to take the propedeuticum exams, which are the big exams in the middle of the training process. And I needed money. I needed extra books. I needed extra consultation sessions to help me prepare for the exams. I needed to work less so that I could study. I just needed a little cash influx. And I knew that if I asked him, he was going to go, blah, 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 blah. We
Mhm.
can't afford this, and blah, blah, this kind of thing. And I just didn't want to deal with it. So I did something really sneaky. I asked my dad for a loan, and my dad gave me a loan. And, I mean, it's, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out my husband's gonna be like, where'd this money come from on the bank
Mhm.
account, right? Like, but it's really not cool to
Mhm.
do that in a marriage, right? To ask for a loan and not tell your partner. I wasn't cool what I did, but I felt like I had to do it. So I just did it. That's trickster. But my husband was understandably upset that I had gone behind his back. And he said, well, why did you do that? And I said, because I didn't want to deal with your pushback.
Mm.
And he said, well, next time, just push harder.
Wow, that's great.
And it just stopped me in my tracks because he was issuing me an invitation to become a worthy opponent.
Hmm.
In other words, yes, I'm going to yell and scream and throw a tantrum if you ask me for, X amount of money, but just stand up to me and insist, just push,
Yeah.
keep it in the container. I'm going to have do my thing over here. And then you come back at me.
Hmm.
And that I think is a really great image for what I mean by becoming a worthy opponent. So don't do what I did.
Right.
Well, I love that because I think in all relationships, there needs to be a balance. Like, of course, you don't want to be always demanding and pushing, pushing, pushing. But it's that if some person is never pushing, the
Right.
relationship just, it's like energy, like the
Yeah.
relationship needs that pushback. And that's what helps people grow. And I hear so many women say, I just can't mention this to my husband, or I can't ask for that, or I'm tolerating, and they just tolerate and tolerate and tolerate. And then it's, like I love that is like, what would happen if you just asked? Just do it regardless of what happens. Like, you own the action. You have
Yeah.
power in
Yeah.
the action, regardless of what happens.
And not even, I mean, it's so interesting because there's a way to ask which conveys, I don't expect you to say yes. And then there's a way to ask that says, I want this and I'm going to fight for it.
Hmm. Very,
Yeah.
like, not like, almost like apologetic. You could
Yeah.
be like, oh, I know
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
really hard, or this is what I want. And
Right. And
people
this,
respect that too. I
yes.
think as
Yes.
women, a lot of times we think
Yeah.
that's pushy or assertive or aggressive. And it's like, no, just say how it is. I grew up in New Jersey, so I
Hmm.
was very direct. And we're taught to be very direct on the East Coast. And when I moved to
Hmm.
Denver, this one girl I work with, I just asked her a direct question and she went crying to her boss, like, oh, like she was mean to me. And I'm like, I just asked you a question. And it's so, like, we have to um, know that it's just, you can't control how someone's going to receive it. But
Hmm.
also, it's directness is the best way to be sometimes
Yeah.
when you really want to get something, or else you're just, being passive aggressive, or you're being frustrated because you're not asking for what you want. And then
Hmm.
you're in your mind making the other person wrong and resenting them, which doesn't help them either.
Right.
I think it gives the other person permission to also be empowered or to
Mhm.
feel
Yes.
empowered.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And so the empowerment, where has it been all this time? Is it in the unconscious? Is it part of the shadow?
I think that's really it. I didn't hammer that term in the book partly because my editor said, like, I think that's sort of, it's on the wane, so don't focus on that. But in essence, that's what I'm talking about in the book, and I do use the term a couple of times. It's for most women qualities like disagreeableness and desire and even sexuality and rage and ruthlessness and authority are in the shadow.
Mhm.
And specifically, these are things that we have not allowed ourselves to develop. And so, yeah, it's kind of the task of development to claim those, to work with those, to integrate those. So I'm not talking about when I say ruthlessness, for example, I'm not, I gave a presentation, and it's interesting. Every time I presented on this and I talk about those qualities, someone will say, well, gosh, I mean, I agree with you in general, but I would never want to be ruthless, or I would
Hmm.
never want to be tricky, you know. I think that the point is to have access to the capacity to be those things.
Hmm.
Not that you want to go through the world being ruthless, but to be able to find that in yourself for the moment that it is required. Same with trickster or any one of these. And so of course discernment is a continual theme too, because you do have to decide, is now a time when I want to be a little tricky?
Hmm.
You know, is
And
that
also, wouldn't you say that what I noticed is these persona types, these personality traits, they're not you. I mean, like if you're ruthless in the moment or you have it's just an energy that you're using. It's not your
Mhm.
identity. And I
Right.
think a lot of people identify behavior with their identity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good way of putting it. It's like a tool.
Yes.
You're and in some sense I think that is one way to define individuation, just one way, is that we have developed all of our tools and we can use them choicefully
Mm,
rather than just kind of being just resting on an old script that's a little compulsive, or at least certainly unconscious.
mhm.
We could actually say, you know, I think in this moment right now, I need to use this tool.
That's a
It's
great
that
way.
freedom of
Yeah.
choice, right? Instead of a compulsion, you're choosing.
Yeah, it's like a broader perspective on what's available to you and how to respond to the world, to the
Hmm.
situation. Yeah. I imagine you've done your personal individuation process. Uh, what what comes after the shadow? After you integrate the shadow, and I understand there's probably always some shadow to work with, but in the process of individuation, the way Jung laid it out, what's the next phase? What what becomes that relationship with the unconscious? What's the theme there?
You know, it's difficult for me to think about it in terms of phases, and I know, of course, Jung did, but I think practically, it's just difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around it in that way. I think that, you know, you really put your finger on it by saying it's about cultivating the relationship with the unconscious, which of course is ongoing.
Right.
And we never, you know, Jung also said you can't empty out the unconscious. You're always going to be kind of cultivating that relationship and trying to understand what your particular task is. So maybe that's why it's hard for me to think about it as, well, first you do this and then you do
Right.
this.
Right.
Mhm.
But it's more like what is required of me? You know, Jim Hollis has this wonderful question, what wants to come into the world through me?
Mm,
And I think that that is, you know, in essence, that's the kind of individuation question, is what is that? What do I need to make manifest? And that can vary so much for each one of us.
mhm,
So I think for myself, actually, really, you know, this book in some ways is so deeply personal because I do think that one of my main life themes, sometimes I'll talk to my analysians about a life theme. One of my life themes has been claiming authority.
mm.
And so, you know, I really see I mean, it's
You're
not really
doing a
that
good job.
surprising. Yeah, I mean, I'm better than I used to be, for sure. Still some ways to go, but I've made a lot of strides. You know, there's a lot of analysis, a lot of inner work. But, but, uh, but, you know, I mean, a lot of the themes in the book are very personal to me because I've had to wrestle with this. And I do think that many women also have to wrestle with it. I don't, maybe perhaps not all of us, but
Yeah,
you know,
I
I used to
definitely
see
think, yeah.
this. Yeah, you would agree. I would
Yeah,
see
I mean,
this
I
in the
felt I related to everything you
okay.
wrote,
That's
as a
that's
woman.
good because for years working with clients, I'd be like, she's having authority problems. And I would think to myself, Lisa, you're just projecting your own stuff onto your client. But I'm like, no, I don't think I am. So yeah, I think it may be a bit of a universal experience for
Well,
women.
one universal theme, which I love, you quoted Marianne Woodman in your book, and this concept I never heard before either. Um, this idea of rage that we keep
Hmm.
in our shadow, and that's very universal. All the women we've worked with, over the years, I know me personally, my first experience of shadow work, had just met Rob, and I was triggered by a client, and he was like, "Oh, that's your anger." And I said, "What? I don't have any anger." And it was such a transformational experience for me to face my own anger.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to quote you here, or Marianne Woodman. There's a difference between personal anger in intimate relationships and transpersonal rage from an archetypal level. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that because I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, I think when that it bubbles up from that archetypal level, it feels so frightening often, especially if you're a woman who feels like she shouldn't get angry at all.
Hmm.
But it is different because it brings this deep wisdom with it, right?
Hmm.
It is frightening. It certainly can be destructive, but it is also renewing. And include that remarkable dream from the woman who sort of saw that this fiery woman who's just coming to rain down destruction on everything. And it was the woman's personal anger, and
Hmm.
it kind of that she'd buried for many years in her marriage. But it was also kind of a visitation from the goddess, from a chthonic, rageful goddess, of which there are many in most pantheons,
Hmm.
whether it's Kali or Lilith or the Erinyes in the Greek pantheon. And so it's there's something that's dark but life-giving about that energy.
Hmm.
And it's tricky to know how to relate to it because it genuinely can be destructive.
If you
But it's
focus on it if you're like kind of keeping it in a box or feeling like you don't have power, it becomes very destructive because you're just angry and you're staying in anger. But if you can
yes.
say, what is this going to push me forward? Like, what is this, what is in me is like going, hey, like I want to be expressed and to look at it that way.
Yeah, although I do think that the fear of it is also justified. Like that woman, she didn't know what was going to happen when she got that angry at her husband. I mean, it really worked out very well, actually. She grew, he grew, their marriage grew, but she could have had this big outburst, and it could have ended the marriage.
Mhm.
That was a real possibility. I mean, not saying she has one angry outburst and that's it, but her at that point she was no longer able to continue to be accommodating because the goddess had visited her. And was the marriage going to end when she stopped being accommodating?
Mhm.
That was the question. So I mean, for better, it may be that whenever the goddess visits us in that way, that it's going to burst the bounds of previous constrictions and will be kind of healthy for us, and it could still be really destructive too.
Mm.
So I mean, I think there's a reason why we're like, I don't want it, not today, thanks.
And it doesn't feel good in the body either when you're raging and angry. But it's like if you ignore it, it actually has more destructive
Yeah.
nature in the unconscious than if you're conscious of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you use the myths to understand the personal journey, and that's such an art in itself, right? To
Mm-hmm.
be able to make that connection, and to give people that experience that there is this intelligence in the unconscious mind that is paying attention, in a sense, to what we're up to, and chiming in with the myths, right, and
Mm-hmm.
giving us these hints as to what is our work about and what do we need to do. What
Yeah. What story are we in?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. The Do you see that? I mean, why do we dismiss that in the modern world?
Do you mean why do we dismiss stories or?
Yeah, and especially dream work and the mythology that is obviously there.
Well, I mean, I think we have we're out of balance. I mean, I think about the incredible work of Ian McGilchrist, who he wrote that amazing book, The Master and His Emissary.
Mhm.
And what he says in that book is that that we have these two hemispheres, and they kind of experience the world in different ways, and that both are necessary. And he kind of traces this historic arc where it used to be more in balance, And what he says is that the right hemisphere is the master and the left hemisphere is the emissary. And it's happened that the emissary has kind of betrayed the master. And we're more tilted toward this kind of rational, the rationalistic,
Mm,
and we've forgotten the kind of sacred gift, as Einstein calls it, of the imagination. Rather than our rationality being in service to the kind of holistic, intuitive vision that's provided to us by the imaginative part of the psyche.
mhm,
It's kind of gotten buried. So there's a kind of very long, at least according to McGilchrist, and I think he makes a very convincing argument that this is the product of kind of thousands of years of cultural evolution. So it's hard to sort of say what's this one thing,
Right,
mhm,
right.
but it's a fascinating and I think incredibly important question.
Yeah. and and that's precisely what we need, because it's like Wilson's idea that we have this primitive brain and this medieval these medieval institutions, and yet we have this technology that's godlike, and
Hmm.
that's a bad combination.
Yep. Yep. And you're right. I think that's very connected to this kind of hypothesis. And this is also something that Jung talked about in a way too, because he talks about, most of the problems that we have are because we're disconnected from our instincts, what he called the 2 million-year-old man. And he says, where does that man speak to us? In our dreams.
mm,
So leaning into the non-rational, making space for it in our lives, whether it's dream work or fairy tales, is really healing. It's healing on an individual level, and I believe it can be healing on a cultural level as well.
mm.
Right.
I know. I mean, we do coaching, and a lot of people think just thinking positive, and if I just have my goals, and the coaching industry has gotten so like
Mm,
corporate and left brain, and it's like you need to kind of work with your imagination and your
yeah.
and emotions and all these other aspects of ourselves, and you can't just like have a checklist to get through life. And
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's why we love this work. And we really, your book is really amazing. And we just had James Hollis actually on our show too. And I pulled out another quote that you wrote about him, about like, I think to end it was like a lot of people ask us, how do you know if this is your true self, or if it's my persona, my shadow, and is it good to be this or bad? And he said, it's not good, not bad, but authentic.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
love that idea.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, like, I just wanted you to elaborate on that. Like, what was your take on that? With when people sometimes they persona swap and they think, okay, I'm going to bring this aggressive person in, but just in opposition to this other persona they had. And like,
Mhm.
how do they cultivate that authentic? How do they know when it's really authentic?
Mhm. You know, Jung Jung said this great thing, which I wish I had chapter and verse, but I don't. But he said, when you think you found a truth, taste it. Put it in your mouth, chew on it, swallow it, see how you feel afterwards. And if it tastes good and you feel good, then that's a truth. And you can take that and offer it to other people. So I really like that image of, you sort of have to just live with something and see if it works.
Mm. That's a really great idea because it's different for everyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like what's authentic for one person is not authentic for someone else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hmm.
that's the idea of individuation, right? That
Yes.
it's our unique path.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just be so thankful for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I mean, we listen to you on this Young in Life all the time, and it's just so great to finally talk to you directly and
Mm.
meet you in person. And we just really enjoy your book. We invite everyone to buy Lisa Marchiano's book, The Vital Spark: Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire.
Well,
And it's coming out in February.
February 6th.
Oh, nice! Just
Mhm.
in time for Valentine's.
I don't know that it lends itself well to being a Valentine's present, but
Well, it could be
perhaps in a
self-love.
very okay, there you go. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And we will hopefully see you soon.